great athleticism. Feet in.
The warehouse in Indianapolis was silent except for the faint shuffling of cardboard boxes being stacked one upon another, each one carefully sealed, yet heavy not merely with paper and ink, but with possibility, carrying inside it the magic that only a book can give to a child who has never owned one of their own. And as Caitlin Clark stood among the 22,000 volumes ready to be distributed to under-resourced schools across Iowa and Indiana, she found herself unexpectedly swept back to the memory of a 7-year-old girl sitting in a second-grade classroom at Grandview Elementary, clutching a crumpled dollar bill and staring with equal parts longing and embarrassment at a colorful scholastic book order form that promised worlds she feared might be forever out of reach, for it was in that small, tender moment that a seed had been planted, one that years later would blossom into one of the most impactful literacy initiatives in sports history, a movement that would remind people everywhere that greatness in sport is not measured only by points scored or records broken, but by the way an athlete uses their platform to open doors for others. The memory itself was not grand in appearance, yet it held within it all the ingredients that shape a life: struggle, kindness, belief, and a promise that would echo for over 15 years until it was finally fulfilled on a scale neither the child nor the teacher could have imagined. At the time, Caitlin's family was enduring financial hardship, her father dealt caught between NBA contracts and her mother, and working multiple jobs just to hold things together. And though the Clarks always emphasized love and resilience over material possessions, Caitlin was acutely aware, even at 7, of the differences between her world and that of some of her classmates, particularly on the day the book order forms came out, when other children eagerly circled multiple titles there, lists long and joyful, while she sat quietly, pressing the single wrinkled bill into her palm as if it might multiply if she only wished hard enough. It was Mrs. Patterson, her second-grade teacher, who noticed not only the hesitation but the weight behind it, the silent battle between wanting and restraint, and with a kindness that would etch itself permanently into Caitlin's heart, she knelt beside her desk and asked softly, "Sweetheart, which book speaks to your heart?" Caitlin had whispered that she could only afford one, her cheeks burning as she pointed to a story about a young girl who dreamed of becoming a professional athlete, adding in a hushed tone that she also wished for the one about a girl who became a teacher, but she knew she could not have both. What happened next was an act of grace so small in outward appearance that most of the classroom never noticed it at all, but it changed everything for Caitlin. Without saying a word, Mrs. Patterson added both books to the order and paid for the second one herself, a quiet gesture of generosity she had repeated countless times over her career for students whose families could not stretch their budgets to cover books. For she believed that no child should be denied the joy of owning a story that might one day shape their future simply because of financial constraints. When the books arrived 2 weeks later and Caitlin discovered 2 rather than 1 waiting for her, she ran up to Mrs. Patterson insisting that there had been a mistake, only to be met with a knowing smile and words that glowed with mystery. Sometimes the universe sends us exactly what we need, even when we don't think we deserve it. Both of those books chose you, Caitlin, and your job is to read them and then share their magic with others. That night, with the books clutched tightly in her hands, Caitlin devoured them cover to cover. But more than the plots or characters, it was Mrs. Patterson's words about sharing magic that embedded themselves in her soul, sparking a determination she could barely articulate at such a young age. The very next day, she approached her teacher with uncharacteristic resolve and declared, "When I grow up and become successful, I'm going to make sure every kid gets to have as many books as they want. I promise." Though she could not possibly have understood the magnitude of that vow, Mrs. Patterson recognized its sincerity, responding with a gentle pat on the head and a line that Caitlin would carry with her forever. "I believe you will, sweetheart, and when that day comes, remember that the most important thing isn't how many books you give away, but how many dreams you help create." Over the years, as Caitlin's life moved from school gyms to national arenas, from a hopeful young girl in Iowa to one of the brightest stars in basketball, that promise remained tucked quietly in her heart, resurfacing whenever she thought about the power of teachers, the gift of opportunity, and the quiet resilience that comes from those who believe in you before the world takes notice. So when she finally stood in that Indianapolis warehouse years later, gazing out over thousands of books, waiting to be delivered, she felt not like a philanthropist or celebrity, but like a child returning to fulfill a sacred vow to the teacher who had once taught her that books are more than stories. They are lifelines, doorways, companions, and sparks of possibility. Yet what nobody outside of her closest circle knew was that this massive book donation was not motivated by statistics, press, or even corporate sponsorships. It was rooted in that single act of kindness by Mrs. Patterson and in Caitlin's determination never to forget the promise she made when she was only 7 years old, to ensure that no child would ever feel the pang of choosing between one book and another, or worse, the emptiness of having none at all. As the foundation prepared to distribute books to schools where libraries were outdated, where classrooms shared sets of torn paperbacks, and where children had never experienced the pride of holding a book that was truly their own, Caitlin spoke openly about her memory, explaining that it was not just the act of receiving 2 books that changed her, but the belief that someone saw her heart, her potential, and her hunger to learn even when circumstances tried to limit her. This initiative, she explained, was not about her name or even about basketball. It was about fulfilling the promise of access, about creating generations of children who, like her, could sit down with a book and discover that the worlds within its pages might one day inspire them to build their own. In that moment, the connection between a teacher and a pupil had come full circle, reminding everyone watching that some of the most powerful movements in society are not born in boardrooms or political chambers, but in the quiet compassion of a classroom where a teacher sees a child struggling and chooses to respond with generosity. Today, as the books continue to flow from that warehouse into eager hands, Caitlin's foundation stands as proof of the extraordinary ripple effect one teacher's kindness can create, showing that promises made by children, when nurtured by love and belief, can grow into legacies that touch thousands, and that the measure of success is not just the trophies you hold, but the number of lives you light up along.
Geisel Suda, the mid-range. He's turning the corner, gets to the hoop and puts it in.
Ooh, and taking a little bump.
Fast forward 15 years, and Caitlin Clark stood in that vast Indianapolis warehouse, surrounded by the towering stacks of 22,000 books that symbolized the fulfillment of a promise she had made as a wide-eyed 7-year-old girl. A promise that had taken root in a second-grade classroom and blossomed into one of the most remarkable literacy initiatives connected to sport. And yet for Caitlin, this wasn't simply about philanthropy or numbers on a press release. It was about memory, gratitude, and the unshakable bond between a child and the teacher who believed in her when she could not quite believe in herself. Only 3 days earlier, she had picked up the phone, her hands trembling slightly as she dialed the number she had tracked down after weeks of searching, and when the voice on the other end answered, lined with age yet instantly recognizable in its warmth, she knew that this journey had come full circle. Mrs. Patterson, it's Caitlin Clark. I don't know if you remember me, but I was in your second-grade class at Grandview Elementary, and after a short pause came the reply, tinged with emotion. Caitlin, of course I remember you. You were the little girl who promised to share books with the world. To which Caitlin's voice, heavy with tears, replied, I'm calling because I kept that promise. I'm donating 22,000 books to schools, and I wanted you to know that it all started with you believing in a girl who could only afford one book, and what Mrs. Patterson said. Next stunned Caitlin, for she admitted that the memory of Caitlin's joy had reignited her own sense of purpose as a teacher, reminding her of why she had chosen the profession in the first place, a revelation that shifted Caitlin's perspective entirely and deepened her understanding of how small moments can ripple outward in unimaginable ways. Their conversation stretching for more than an hour as they exchanged memories and dreams, until Caitlin finally said, Mrs. Patterson, I want you to be part of this. I want you to help me choose which schools get the books. You understand better than anyone how to identify the children who need them most. And from that invitation, a new chapter began, with Mrs. Patterson emerging from retirement to become the literacy consultant for the Caitlin Clark Foundation, using her 4 decades of experience to ensure the initiative reached the children most in need, so that when the official launch took place at Roosevelt Elementary in Des Moines, the symbolism of Caitlin and Mrs. Patterson standing side by side was not lost on anyone present. The teacher who had once slipped an extra book into a child's order was now helping to deliver thousands, and Caitlin's words to the gathered pupils carried the weight of her own story. These books aren't just stories, they're doorways to anywhere you want to go, anything you want to become. Some of you might read about athletes and decide to pursue sport. Others might read about teachers and decide to inspire the next generation. The important thing is that you read, you dream, and you remember to share that magic with others. While Mrs. Patterson, her voice softened by time yet strengthened by wisdom, told the children that the woman beside her had once been just like them, uncertain whether she could afford books, but always believing in the power of stories. And because she kept a promise she had made at their age, they now had books of their own, and the impact of this initiative soon began to ripple outward as schools reported higher engagement in reading, improved literacy scores, and perhaps most importantly, children proudly carrying books home to share with their families. And 6 months later, Caitlin received a letter written in careful cursive by an 8-year-old girl named Maria Santos, who thanked her for the books about a scientist and a community leader, writing that her mother had told her she could be anything if she kept reading and dreaming, and closing with the words, "When I grow up, I want to give books to kids too. Just like you did, I promise," accompanied by a drawing of Caitlin and Maria surrounded by smiling children and books, with the words, "Sharing magic with others."